And I know you're probably answering a lot of questions on this front, but in your confirmation hearing, you said that you'd have dual priorities at the IRS, and I quote, equally focused on improving taxpayer services and improving the IRS's capacity to unpack complex returns, end quote. Now, and I appreciate and respect your aspirations there, but the funding priorities in the Inflation Reduction Act and the President's budget show very different priorities. For example, of the $80 billion provided to the IRS and the partisan IRA, more than half, or about $46 billion, is directed toward enforcement activities, only 4% of the $80 billion. And I get 4% was earmarked for improving taxpayer services. And President Biden recently proposed boosting the IRS budget by 15% over and above the massive funding increase the IRS received from the Inflation Reduction Act. The President's budget would provide a separate additional $29 billion to the IRS for enforcement, again, in addition to the $46 billion for enforcement the IRS received last August. So, given the overwhelmingly disproportionate funding toward enforcement compared to taxpayer services, would you agree that some of the IRA enforcement funds could be more effectively spent on improving customer service?
That's a good question, Senator. I think that we actually need funds to do both, and I worry that if we were to redirect funds out of one bucket into another, we would lose important ground that we need to cover in one particular area. And I say that, I know it seems like for the enforcement dollars that there's a lot. The reality is that today we have 2,600 staff that work on high-income, high-wealth taxpayers, individuals, corporations, and complex partnerships. There are more than 390,000 of those. So, and 390,000 high-wealth, high-income taxpayers, corporations, individuals, and partnerships, and we have 2,600 staff. And a lot of these filings are thousands of pages, tens of thousands of pages, and some come in hundreds of thousands of pages. So every dollar we move off of our efforts to build the capacity to unpack those returns means I think we're leaving money on the table for the American people in terms of our ability to close the gap in terms of what's paid versus what's owed.
Well, and I don't dispute the fact that there probably could be some need for additional enforcement. It just seems like the way this skews, you think about 4% for taxpayer services. You had, 90% of the phone calls into the IRS weren't answered in 2021, and I think it was a little better last year. And then you've got this, massive amount of funding infused into the enforcement, not only out of the IRA, but now also out of the, the budget, the present budget, which we're considering and talking about here today. But I want to make one other point, and I think it maybe was touched on just by Senator Cornyn, but the Inflation Reduction Act, only 4%, $3.2 billion over the overall funds toward taxpayer service. The IRS Inflation Reduction Act Strategic Operating Plan, which was recently released more than 45 days late, I might add, proposes a total of $3.9 billion for energy security, which includes $1.2 billion of the total allotment for taxpayer services. Now, by energy security, is the IRS referring to an all of the above energy approach, including conventional energy production, or simply provisions related to green energy?
The funds that we need are to implement the energy credits. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of customer service reps that we need. So, for example, in the budget for 2024, we've asked for a $1.8 billion incremental increase. Part of that $1.8 billion is to fund about 1,200 new customer service agents and staff to help us implement the energy credits, because we're going to get a lot of questions coming in, and there's going to be a lot, and we're going to have to process additional applications for credit. So that's what that funding is talking about.
So, but as IRS Commissioner, what is a higher priority for your delivering better taxpayer services? Or is it advancing new Green Deal policies, which I will note are projected to blow way past initial CBO projections? I mean, is it taxpayer service or is it Green New Deal priorities?
It's taxpayer service, and the reason is because
why doesn't the budget reflect that?
The IRS's responsibility is to administer the law that's enacted by Congress. And so we don't take policy preferences. We basically try to manage the portfolio.
I know you don't do that, but you do have to prioritize. You have a certain amount of allocated resources.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying, when 4% is going to taxpayer services with the deplorable record the IRS has in responding to people across this country, and I'm all for secure and sustainable energy policies, but I am deeply concerned that the IRS has made more IRA funds committed to promoting the administration's radical energy agenda than for improving taxpayer services. And I know my time's expired. I'm working with Senator Grassley on an IRS Funding Accountability Act, which hopefully will bring some transparency and accountability to this massive infusion of dollars and resources and employees the IRS now has. And I just really urge you to reconsider your priorities.
Senator Thune, just very quickly, and then we'll go next to Senator Warner. On this question that you started with respect to service and enforcement, and you and I have worked on so many of these tax issues over the years, I would just hope that we would not say these are mutually exclusive. We ought to do both. We desperately need to improve services. Our citizens are telling us that's important, but we also need enforcement because that's what the tax gap is all about. If we don't enforce the tax gap, we won't get the money from these wealthy people, but I'll look forward to the kind of proposals that you're going to be making and always willing to work with you.